Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alex Paul from InvestorStream and I'll be your host this morning. Now, as you all know, today we have AnteoTech CEO Derek Thomson, who will be providing us with an update on the company's life sciences operations. Joining Derek today is AnteoTech Head of Diagnostics and Life Science, Charlie Huang, to give a short presentation on this progress, and both will be on hand to address any questions following the presentation. I just want to say we've been inundated with questions from investors over the past week, so thanks everyone for your interest. We'll try and do our best to get through as many questions as we can. You can feel free to send through a question via the question pane at the GoToWebinar control panel, but please bear in mind that we have quite a limited time up our sleeve today, so we're trying to get through as many questions as possible. You can also download a copy of the presentation by navigating to the handouts pane in the control panel, and a copy of the webinar will also be available on AnteoTech's website and social media platforms later today. But for now, I'd like to throw it over to Derek and Charlie, who's going to get us underway. Gents, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. The extraordinary events of 2020 surrounding a global COVID-19 pandemic have enabled the medical, clinical and diagnostic industry to build new innovation and new technologies and new focus on the control of the disease that so affected our lives. And that has meant that the diagnostics market and the point of care market has grown quite significantly and has new focus and new energy to deal with this pandemic. We believe that the point of care market that we're in has changed quite a bit and probably forever, simply because of this pandemic, and there'll be new innovation and new opportunities because of the focus and attention and investment on that market going forward. Our response to COVID-19 has been to live up to our mandate to make a contribution to the global challenges of our time. We did that by bringing forward our planned assay development program by 1 full year to produce a COVID-19 antigen rapid test assay that we're in development with now and are going through the commercializing stages to bring to market early next year. In so doing, we've altered the fundamental business model of the life sciences business, and that will provide us with a platform for new growth and new opportunity going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity today. We so wish that we could be with you in person in some sort of forum, but circumstances prevent. So this forum is how we intend to communicate the business going forward until the pandemic relieves. We know that there's a lot of long-time supporters of AnteoTech in amongst the audience today, and we thank you for your support, and we wish you well, and we hope that you are well during these extraordinary times. And we especially reach out and say hello to our Victorian supporters who we know have been through a very tough time recently. Here today with Charlie Huang. Welcome, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Yeah.
Today Charlie and I will be providing an overview of the life science business as a result of our bringing forward of the assay development program by 1 full year. So let's get into that straight away and move to the first slide, perhaps, Charlie, which is a disclaimer. As always, we're obviously a publicly listed company, and the information that we're about to provide to you is an update on the company's operation and is in no way any advice on how to invest in the company going forward. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the company, there's 2 divisions that we have. The life sciences division is the division that is involved with the point of care industry and the one that we're talking about today. We also have an energy division, which is focused on the energy density enhancement of the lithium-ion battery. And in a couple of weeks' time, we will be presenting a separate webinar similar to this one on the energy business. So watch out for our announcements around that. We will be doing that in a couple of weeks' time. Underpinning both sides of our business is a patented service management technology. On the life sciences side, the brand name is AnteoBind, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, thank you. So the next slide that you're looking at here is a portrayal of what the life science business looks like today as a result of us bringing forward the assay development program forward by 1 year. The figure on the right depicts 3 separate subunits of our life science business that are in existence. The first one at the top is the assay development area, where, as I mentioned, we're developing a COVID-19 assay at the moment, and we've got some opportunity to develop some more business around that. The one on the bottom left-hand corner is our traditional raw material business, which is the business that sells and supplies AnteoBind and other products into the market for other assay developers. And the quadrant on the lower right is a new area that we're planning to develop late this year, early next year, and it's leveraging our ISO 13485 position and our capability to help other assay producers along their journey to building assays and putting them into the marketplace. The 2 outer circles are the leverage areas. The leverage on the right-hand side is our recently acquired ISO 13485 capability and the QMS program that surrounds it. It's quite comprehensive. It enables us to be a legal manufacturer. We can also use it in the assay services area. And the figure on the left is our conjugation and lateral flow competency, which is growing very rapidly now that we're in the market of building assays ourselves. So those 2 areas are our key leverage areas. Moving on, thank you, Charlie. We're just going to drill down into each of the 3 quadrant areas quickly, just to give you an overview of how our business has changed as a result of us bringing forward the assay development program. And the first one is the assay development program itself. Most people would be aware that we're building the COVID-19 antigen assay, and we've been making announcements about that as we develop that program of work. We've also got 2 other current proof of concept assays available to us. One is the Flu A, Flu B, and we plan to build that into a multiplex with the COVID-19 asset as we go through the commercialization process. And earlier in the year, we developed a very good sepsis test that we've got to proof of concept stage, and we plan to bring that to market sometime after the COVID-19 antigen program is completed. Those 3 are the current tests that we have, but we plan to build more, and the leverage points around building more assays go back to our traditional basis of our business. It's the AnteoBind capability, which drives high sensitivity, the surface management capability of AnteoBind on various particles, which drives high sensitivity, our conjugation and lateral flow expertise, which we're building up, and as I mentioned before, our ISO 13485 capability. All those elements together give us the opportunity to enter a market in 2 primary areas: high sensitivity tests that are reader based, similar to the ones that the one that we're developing now with the COVID-19 test, and also high sensitivity or visual tests that we can produce as well. Charlie, you're the Commander-in-Chief of our assay development program. Can you give us a sense of what the capability can produce in this assay development area going forward?
Yeah, sure. AnteoBind activated particles is very sensitive. So using AnteoBind, we can activate gold nanoparticles, magnetic particles, or latex color particles. All these particles has been widely utilized in the point of care industries to develop tests. For example, the hormone tests or diabetes, HbA1c. All these tests doesn't require the kind of very high sensitivities. Using AnteoBind to activate these particles will provide this test better reproducibility and also a scale up and better performance. So we believe not only just reader-based test we can cater for, but also the visual test or the test doesn't require kind of European fluorescence sensitivities. We can provide a solution.
Yeah, so our current COVID-19 antigen test program with a reader is enabling a capability that we believe can be leveraged across a vast array of different tests, and we're looking at those according to market need going forward. So the capability that we have developed in the assay development area would enable us to bring assays to market upon market need going forward, and we believe this is going to provide the business with a lot of new growth into the future. The next area that we should look at, Charlie, is the traditional raw material business that we have, and this business relates to the supply of AnteoBind to other assay developers, and we've been seeing a lot of activity in this part of our business due to COVID-19, and we're getting good feedback on the qualities of AnteoBind via the use of other assay developers. Charlie, can you give us some of the feedback that we've been getting from the market around that?
Yeah, I think the market feedback is based on the reproducibility. After the AnteoBind activate the European particles or other particles, the kind of reproducibility is very good in batch-to-batch reproducibility. Especially, it will enable the manufacturing much easier in handling their needs, especially in the scale up as well. By doing so, it will be able to provide the manufacturers a peace of mind in their manufacturing, and they can timely supply the test to the market.
Thank you, Charlie. So our case study around the virtues of using AnteoBind in an assay at scale is the local company Illum. Now, Illum have been scaling up their activities quite a bit recently. They're in the market today. We know, talking about their own COVID-19 exploitation. So that, you know, they're in the very strong market that we're in, but they are using AnteoBind as the basis for a lot of their testing work and a lot of their product going forward. So that they have seen the virtues of using AnteoBind for the reproducibility aspects that it brings, but also the high sensitivity and the enablement of the assays to work more effectively. So it's a great case study for us, and we've got a good, strong relationship with Illum. We do have an AnteoBind supply contract in place with them now, and we're seeing quite a bit of increased volume coming from the Illum business going forward, and we're quite excited about our relationship with them, obviously, going forward. So so that's our raw material business. So Charlie, move to the next one, which is our assay services opportunity. Now, the assay services opportunity really comes off the back of a very strong QMS set of processes for developing assays. And of course, we're in the middle of one of those processes now with our COVID-19 antigen process, and we're using our own processes to commercialize our product. Our plan going forward is to exploit that capability to help other assay developers do similar sorts of things. Now, the market is quite buoyant in this area. About 25% of the profits that are generated from the development of assays is poured back into new development work, and therefore this opens up an opportunity for organisations such as ourselves to offer our services to help these organisations build new assays. And we've got several leverage points that we can harness to do that. You can see them on the screen there. We've got conjugation expertise, and probably one of the most advanced conjugation expertises, certainly in the Southern Hemisphere, if not the world. We've obviously got our AnteoBind position, which is very good in producing assays, and the Illum case study is a good case in point. We've got design and manufacturing experience, which is coming along quite well with their own efforts, and you can see there the quality management systems and ISO as well. So we've got a great opportunity to exploit this. We're looking at it from a cash flow perspective. Everything that we do in services is short-term cash flow work, and we've got a couple of focus areas in the pipeline right now, one of which Charlie can talk about. Yeah,
for example, like in the vaccine development, the polysaccharide is very important, like additives or as a component. But binding polysaccharide to like particles or to the surface is not easy. In our in-house study, we already demonstrated that AnteoBind activated surfaces or particles can easily conjugate to polysaccharide, and these polysaccharide conjugated particles or surfaces can be utilized in the downstream, like a quality control purpose or assay development purpose. In doing so, providing this kind of unique and very rapid kind of assay development process can accelerate those vaccine developers in their assay development process. So that's quite excited about it.
Yeah, so this exercise that we are looking at in terms of assay development or services in general in the vaccine area started off with some conversations with Serum Institute of India, and we've noted that in some of our announcements. But the same problem set that we're looking at with Serum Institute of India has popped up with several other large companies. So the opportunity has actually expanded quite a bit. And it seems to be a problem set in the vaccine area that a lot of organisations are experiencing. So it opens up a good opportunity for us to potentially open up a new market. We're focusing on that as a market play around the development of services in this area. It's a great example because we think the use of AnteoBind and the use of our expertise to produce assays can be easily leverageable across significant areas of market need where perhaps we don't have the background experience that we do in straight assay development, and we can further exploit the company's capability to make some short-term cash flow out of those opportunities. So those are the three areas that we wanted to touch on briefly today that we're focused on as a new profile of business model that is opening up a large set of new opportunities for us going forward, simply because we brought forward our assay development process forward by 1 year. Now, the subject on everybody's lips that's associated with AnteoTech has been the development of our COVID-19 antigen rapid test, and we thought we'd just provide one slide to give you a little bit of an update of the work that we're doing in that area. In recent days, we've had some correspondence from the TGA on the back of us requesting some guidance on how to do a clinical trial that will get us through to approval. We suggested a shortened version of a clinical trial to what is the traditional, followed by perhaps a longer one once we're in the market, and that was delivered to the TGA in detail. They've come back in recent days and approved that. So that's great news for us because it actually shortens our time frame to market a little bit. So that's a good piece of news for us that happened in the last couple of days that I've mentioned. Other things that you should know, we've manufacturing discussions with multiple organisations. We've reached out to these organisations, we've set up relationships with them. We're about to discuss the detailed process. That will actually happen in the next couple of days. So that process is starting to get well underway. We have signed a contract with Assay, and that work to finalise the regulatory approval stages with the reader is well underway, and that's all been going quite well. In planning, the market already knows that we're doing a couple of validation trials, one with Operon and one with Genetics, but we've been in discussion with many more organisations, and we've got 3 validation studies which are about to start later in the month. One of those is in the US, one of them is in Europe, and one of them is in Israel. Israel, you may be aware, has got one of the highest rates of infection per capita anywhere in the world, so they've got quite a big need, and we've been offered to participate in a trial there, which we're quite excited about. The other points there are around the timeline. You can read those at your leisure, but the TGA submission point at this point is February, and we believe that the process of getting approval will be shortened from a normal process, and then it'll get us into the market quicker. So the program itself is going quite well. It's not without its hurdles and not without a hell of a lot of work to do, but we are on track, and we are making very good progress. One area that we should talk about really briefly, we haven't finished our studies with Operon and Genetics, but we've got some early feedback from them on the work that we're doing. And Charlie, can you give us a bit of a brief update on what that feedback looks like?
Yeah, you still remember we have shared some in-house RT-PCR confirmed the COVID-19 swab samples, and the result was quite encouraging. Similarly, from Operon's initial results, it's very consistent to our similar to our observation here in-house. So we are very encouraged by the development there, and moving towards the right direction.
Thank you, Nat. So you may be aware, the market's very aware that we went into the program around the COVID-19 antigen rapid test with a focus on sensitivity. It's our belief that the market need that's required is for a very highly sensitive rapid test in a point of care setting. The situation that we all know is that if you've got a group of people that need to be screened for COVID-19, and one of them has the disease and they're missed in the screening process, it's disastrous. You can't let anybody go through, or it's, you know, much more favourable, obviously, not to let any positive person go through, and therefore the test must be extremely sensitive, and that's the test that we set out to build. So to date, we are quite pleased with the sensitivity that we've generated. We've generated very high sensitivity in testing in our own hands, and it looks as though the testing is being duplicated in other people's hands as well. Our work is not over, and we've got much more validation to do, but we're very encouraged about the work that is occurring with the COVID-19 antigen test in other people's hands, and that's going to be reflected in our market activity going forward. So Alex, that is the presentation as it stands at the moment, and I believe you've got some questions.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, and we've been, like I said before, we've had a large number of questions come through from shareholders, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. The first question that's come through, is AnteoTech aiming to have a COVID-19 point of care test with lab quality results? And do you think initial results are confirming that objective?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When the asker says lab quality results, I think they're referring to PCR testing, or the PCR testing that happens in a lab. Now, the characteristic of lab testing or PCR testing is that the process in the PCR test itself has an amplification capability. So there's a look at the particular sample, and that sample can be amplified continuously to get higher and higher and higher sensitivity in the lab. So it's a very effective test for determining whether the person is positive or not. All point of care tests that are produced in lateral flow or any other mechanism for that matter don't have that amplification process, and so they're never going to be as effective as the lab results that you can get, and therefore, you know, a lot of clinicians do favour lab type results as a confirmation or a second confirmation of a positive result. Having said that, our results are getting very close to what PCR testing produces. We're not far off. You know, the sensitivity that we have produced is commensurate with a lab-based determination of positive or negative, and our lower limit of detection settings are so fine that we believe that we're getting very close to what a PCR would determine anyway. That differential will come through in our clinical trials, and but I think we will find that we've got a very highly effective test when measured against a lab test process.
Thanks, Derek. Shortly after the COVID-19 test update on September 9, Meridian Bioscience announced on September 14 that they had developed an antibody pair designed to be used in rapid saliva antigen tests. I understand the sensitivity was down to picograms per millimetre. Are AnteoTech using this antibody pair, or are you investigating its use?
Well, great question. As a rule, and as a commercial position, we would never ever divulge the antibody pairing of our tests, and no one really does. So secure is that knowledge that only a few people in the office even know what it is, and so we would never divulge it in an open forum, obviously. What we can say is that we've announced before that saliva testing is of an interest to us. It is dependent on the sensitivity that you can achieve, and we're achieving very high sensitivity, and so saliva testing is possible with our test. It does require some development work to be done, and it does require proper sampling to be done. There's not many organisations in the world that actually have COVID-19 positive saliva tests. There's plenty with COVID-19 swab samples, but not saliva. So we've got some work to do in that area as well. Mm-hmm. We have been talking to the Doherty Institute about a program of work that might go into saliva, and that's not solidified yet. Mm-hmm. It's still a discussion. It's certainly on our radar to do saliva testing, but we have to get through our existing swab sample sensitivity process to make it worthwhile. So my answer to the question, Alex, is yes. We want to do saliva testing. It's on our program radar screen. That program is in development now.
So what do you think the COVID-19 test will cost to manufacture, and what price do you think you can sell it for?
Okay, another great question. Thank you. Again, a little bit commercially sensitive, and we're not planning to divulge this information to the open market. What we can say is what we tell most people in the market who ask similar questions around cost. Now, the cost of producing our test will be no different whatsoever to producing any other lateral flow test. There's no additional cost base because it's a high sensitivity test. There's no additional cost base because we use AnteoBind or any other product like that. It's very similar to what a normal lateral flow test would cost. As a matter of fact, it could actually be cheaper because the volume of europium required on a fluorescent test like we have is less, and therefore the volume of one of the primary constituents is lower. So that's our position to the market, and that's been generated and assessed, and we believe it to be quite correct that we are commensurate in cost with any other test in the market. On the sell side, there's plenty of public information around what COVID-19 antigen tests in rapid format are selling for in various markets of the world, and we don't think that we'll be any different to what those prices are. At the end of the day, there's come-ups of margin around distribution, etc. They're commonplace at the moment. We will enter those markets in the same sort of way. So the margins that we generate again will probably be exactly as the same margins that we generate, that other people generate from the distribution of lateral flow tests.
Gents, we've had a number of questions on this particular topic. The lower limit of detection and the sensitivities you've achieved with the COVID-19 test is very impressive. But what have other companies with antigen tests achieved as a comparison? And moving forward, who do you think, or who's likely to win the race to commercialization, if you like?
Okay, this is an extremely complex question, and one that has a lot of technical aspects, which I'm not going to try and tackle on this call. What I will say is we will make an announcement about our results in independent testing, where we'll explain exactly how the lower limit of detection is going to work. But what I can say now is that, yes, you're right, the lower limit of detection that we're achieving because of the sensitivity is very low, and therefore we're able to pick up the antigen very early in the infection cycle. And we believe that we're up there with the top in the world. In terms of point of care tests that are currently in the market, we are right up there with those that have advertised high sensitivity, and we're right there with them. Again, we haven't finished all our independent testing, but we will be making announcements, and we believe that that's the type of position that we will be taking. In terms of setting the lower limit of detection itself, that's a technical aspect. At times we've been playing around with testing of the lower limit of detection, and you know, we've got plenty of variable opportunity to make sure that we're picking up every single positive sample by moving that lower limit of detection around, and that's an ongoing process that we're working with our partners on at the moment. So that process is working well, and we believe that we are going to be right up there in the market in terms of sensitivity.
Is a saliva test a possibility? And if so, what is the progress, and where are we at, or where is Anteo at with such a test?
Yeah, I think we covered a little bit about saliva in a different question. Yeah, it is a possibility, definitely a possibility. Has any organisation in the world tackled a saliva test in a point of care setting? No, no one has yet. And if you talk to the likes of the Doherty Institute, they treat it as the holy grail. If anybody can actually produce one that works and has high sensitivity, you know, that there would be a clear market advantage from the ability to do that. We believe that we can do it. It takes some more development work. Our strategy and our process is to get the swab sample version of the test into the market first. There's an immediate need. The fastest way to market is to do the swab sample version of the test, and we will be working on saliva directly after that. Will we be successful in producing a saliva test that has the same level of sensitivity and effectiveness as the swab sample test. We can't make that claim right now, but we believe that there's a good opportunity for us to do that. And if we can, we will have again another differentiated market opportunity for us going forward.
So when do you expect to have independent testing and clinical trial results for the COVID-19 test?
Okay, well, as I mentioned before, the independent testing with Operon and Genetics is in progress now. Now, we sent another 100 strips to Operon last week. They've come back in the last couple of days. They're going to run those strips next Tuesday. We'll have results from that process by the end of next week. Shortly thereafter, we will be releasing the results of that independent test. As again, as Charlie mentioned, we're getting early feedback on the work that they're doing, that the results that they're getting are commensurate with the results that we got in our lab. So we're quite pleased about that. There may be some learnings to have out of the independent testing, and that's why we do it. Quite often we find there's some technical areas that we need to tweak or some changes that we need to make to the test to make it work better, and that's why we do independent testing, to make sure that we understand and have that information to hand. And that's a possibility out of the work that Operon and Genetics are doing as well. So we're really looking forward to getting that result back in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be announcing that. Separately, in terms of clinical trial or regulatory approval for clinical trial, we are moving into that space right now. As I mentioned before, we've got TGA approval to go forward with our clinical trial plan, and we've got independent third parties that we've engaged to help us out with that process, and we'll be moving into that process very, very soon.
You mentioned on the last slide your timeline for TGA approval. Have AnteoTech obtained any consultants who have experience in getting TGA and FDA approval? And if so, do you expect that could possibly shrink the waiting time?
The answer to the first part of your question is yes. We've engaged external consulting firms, several of them, to help us with the TGA approval process. And in particular, in the clinical trial zone, we don't have experience in clinical trials per se, because this is the first time we've done a commercialization of an assay. So we've engaged an independent third party to help us with the clinical trial, and that organisation actually facilitated our discussion with the TGA to get approval for the process. So we'll continue to work with them through the clinical trial process itself and the TGA submission. On the FDA side, we haven't finalised the process for FDA yet. That's work in progress. What we do know is that the FDA process will accept all the work that we do on the TGA process, so we don't have to duplicate it. It's simply a documentation exercise and a submission exercise, and we are of the belief that the FDA will accept all the TGA clinical trial and regulatory approval processes in their process as well. And we will be getting third-party advice and guidance for the FDA process in due course.
Are Merck contracts in any way tied to COVID-19 independent test results?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The Merck contract, Merck are a supplier to us for this exercise. So Merck's particles are the European particles that we use in the COVID-19 antigen test. So obviously they're a very important part of the initiative and the product, and we're making finalisation steps at the moment to finalise a supply contract with Merck for the European particle in that test and other test work that we're doing as well. So that's a process that's well underway, and now people would be aware that we've got a close relationship with Merck anyway. So you know, we're quite happy to keep that relationship and leverage it into the production of these tests. Are they involved with the independent test results? No, they're not. That's not part of the business that we ask them to participate in, and they don't do a lot of that anyway. So we've focused our relationship with Merck for this exercise on the supply of European particles for the test, and that's working out very well.
We've also had a number of questions on this particular topic as well. So in light of the recent national budget, AnteoTech applying for any government support, and broadly speaking, How are we progressing with government and philanthropic organisations in terms of obtaining a grant to accelerate the COVID test?
Okay, really interesting question, and I'll answer it in several ways. Are we engaged in discussions with the government around support for a rapid test? Yes, we are, and we have been right from the outset. And those discussions are progressing quite well. There's different government stances on point of care testing. You'll see Illum in the market today making some comments about their journey through that process as well. I've got to say, at times we've had similar sorts of discussions with the government where, they're willing to support some things and not others. And that's, just generally part of the process that an organisation such as ourselves has to go through. But I think we've done a very good very good work in understanding what the government will and won't do. And we've focused our attention in certain areas where we think the government will get some benefit, and we will. And those discussions are ongoing, and we will make announcements about those when they come to fruition. So our discussion with the government is not finished. We're in discussion with them right now, and we're very hopeful that we'll have a very positive outcome around that in the not too distant future. The other side of that coin is there are government funding opportunities, but not all of them fit the way that we wanted to do our development, or the way that we could see that we could get a benefit out of it. For an example, the Queensland State Government recently offered a tech fund, which some other organisations that are in our space got some money out of and got some advantage out of. Some of those funds have certain conditions that are attached to them. Didn't suit the way that we were going to do our development. It would actually cost us money at the end of the day in certain areas to go through that process, and therefore we've steered away from them. So we've been quite good at understanding how the development will work and how we can actually harness government money in a way that makes us, that gives us some sort of progressive opportunity, not only from the development side, but with the government relationship as well.
And just on that, this one's coming from me, Derek. If AnteoTech could gain access to that sort of funding, how much could progress be further accelerated if additional funding was available?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've got to be honest. We're well into the process now. We're 50% through the commercialisation process, so there's only 50% of acceleration to go. We have actually done a commercialisation process, again, not completely finished, but in a time frame that large organisations would envy, that have a lot of money. And so, we've done it on a very lean team and a very lean budget, but we've accelerated that process quite a bit. So we're quite proud of the position that we're currently in, notwithstanding we've got still a hell of a lot of work to do. If we were to pour a whole heap of money onto it now, yes, we would accelerate it somewhat, and we would get some advantage out of it. But the opportunity to really make a massive acceleration was probably 3 to 6 months ago. And at the time, the government, to be honest, didn't really understand itself how it was going to use point of care testing to control the pandemic, and therefore getting funding from them was quite difficult at the time.
And again, just on we talked about funding from the government and what getting access to that would do, but in relation to purely the development and the manufacture of the COVID tests, what have the discussions been like with government bodies?
Pretty open and progressive. Certain aspects of the government want to support, but the government really needs to get a political benefit, or a economic benefit out of it as well. So they've been really keen to understand the position that they can take that would benefit not only us but them. But at the end of the day, some government organisations don't place a lot of emphasis on point of care testing, and so it's very difficult to extract a useful mutual position out of that discussion. And I think if you read the comments by Loom today. They've had similar sorts of experiences that we've had, and they express it as frustrating. I think it's more, just a process. Understanding what the government wants and how you can actually bring that to the table and get a benefit out of it yourself is a little bit of an art. We're still in that process, as I mentioned, and we're hopeful that we'll get a positive outcome out of it.
Now, just shifting tack a bit, can you provide any further details on the nature of the work ADO is undertaking with the Serum Institute, and what will be the possible outcome of that work?
Yeah, interesting discussion. We were a little bit surprised when we got approached by the Serum Institute of India. They placed a very large order with us, and we fulfilled it for AnteoTech. So, obviously they're a keen supporter and user of AnteoTech in the vaccine production process generally for QC and other things. So so that's a really good position. They have technical difficulties around their processes, which they came to us with, and we had detailed discussions with them, and we've made them several offers to do some work in-house for them, and they have accepted those offers. They've been a little bit hamstrung recently by some IP issues that they have on their side and their ability to send us some samples. So we've been a little bit frustrated by that process. But in general, the relationship, I think, is good with the Serum Institute of India, and we're working with them to generate a deeper relationship, which we hope will end up with some more business for us. But I might have mentioned in a previous question or as part of the presentation itself, it opened up a observation in the market that the set of problems that they were having were being experienced by a number of organisations in the vaccine space as well. So we're not only just seeing Serum Institute of India at the moment, but we're seeing a whole market opportunity around vaccine with the same set of problems which AnteoTech and our conjugation capability can address. So we're approaching it from a market perspective now, not just a Serum Institute of India perspective.
And given the interest in ADO technology revolving around COVID testing, is the company positioned to enter immediate production to satisfy incoming orders?
Yeah, so good question. We will outsource our manufacturing of the COVID-19 test to third-party manufacturers. We don't have that capability ourselves. So we've identified a number of manufacturers that we want to work with. And as I mentioned to you in our timelines, we're starting that process with them almost immediately. It's ironic that we're having this webinar virtually on the day that we start the process of going through that manufacturing lock-in. Yeah. So I think we're well in hand on that front. We've got a lot of work to do, and we will have outsourced manufacturing via very capable organisations that can produce the test at scale. Mm-hmm. So that part of the business is we're quite confident in, and again, we will not be producing the COVID-19 test at scale ourselves. We just don't have that capability at the moment. In terms of supplying the market with AnteoBind, again, we mentioned that we're seeing an uptick in volume from a number of fronts, but again, Loom being one of our main customers is again ramping up their operations quite a bit, and we're supplying them in increasing volumes going forward. And we have a very good set of capabilities in-house here in Brisbane to produce the volumes that they require and others require. Mm-hmm. It's not a large impost in terms of capital funding to ramp up the capability to produce AnteoBind. So we have enough capability without exorbitant capital funding requirements to produce AnteoBind for the market as we see it going forward. So we're in a great position there. Mm-hmm. And again, notwithstanding the team being extremely busy in both producing the test, but also the raw materials, we think we're in a good position to supply when the market needs it.
Can you just confirm national and international confidence in the company's ability to supply the tech and the units?
Yeah, we don't have any issue. As I mentioned, we haven't had any feedback about any concern about our ability to supply the tech or the test or any product that we put into the market. You know, in years gone by, the company had a bit of a spotlight on it around capital funding and its strategy going forward. The board came on a couple of years ago and gave and has put in place a very clear strategy which is being executed. We've been funded from the markets quite generously in recent times, so we have funding right through into 2022. So we don't have any particular short-term requirements for funding right at the moment, and so the profile of the organisation is good, and the market that we're in is growing, notwithstanding it's because of this pandemic, which sometimes I feel guilty in saying that we actually seeing an increase in profile because of it, but that is in fact what is happening, and we're making a contribution which we believe is extremely worthwhile, and you know, we're seeing increasing volumes because of it, and we haven't had any particular issues in supplying the markets due to that increase.
You've mentioned extensively throughout this webinar and in the presentation the relationship that you've developed with Illume. To what extent are you relying on partnerships with companies such as Illume to take on R&D and manufacturing and sales, etc.?
Well, we don't. We are a development organisation. There's no doubt about that. That's our forte, and we do development very, very well. And we've supplied, you know, raw material, as I've explained, in development format to other organisations that have gone on to make tests, and Illume is one of those organisations. We've got several others, so we do that well. We've ventured into the space of assay development in our own right, as I've talked about, and along with that, we you know, need to manufacture and we need to distribute. So we don't have manufacturing capability. We can do small scale lab-based manufacturing, and that's what we've done for our test in validation testing form. But at large scale, we need third-party manufacturers to produce the test for us, and as I've explained, that's the process that we're going through right now. In terms of distribution, you know, we're again a small organisation based in Brisbane. We don't have distribution capability in the US or Europe. There are two of our primary markets, as is Asia and the rest of the world. We don't have distribution capability in those areas as well. So we've been deliberately going out to market to procure the relationships for distribution that we need for the COVID-19 test, and eventually possibly AnteoBind as well. And people on the call may have seen, or if you've been researching, that we've been featured fairly prevalently in international trade media. That was a deliberate move by us to raise the distributors' awareness of our capability in the COVID-19 test, so that we could form the relationships when we need them to do the distribution. That has been an extremely successful program, I've got to say, and we've had incoming inquiries and relationship building up over the last 6 to 8 weeks in all corners of the world. And as a matter of fact, the validation trial that I mentioned that we're going to do in Israel, we didn't target Israel directly. Israel came to us as a result of that program of work. So it's worked extremely effectively, and we're working currently to build the relationships in that area that we need to distribute the test globally.
Derek, have there been any specific discussions internally or with your with government or anyone else with potential end users for the COVID-19 tests, such as, for example, the airline industry?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. Well, again, it's funny when you announce a COVID-19 point of care test, who comes to you? Yeah. So we've had lots of organisations and people come to us, and the airline industry has been one of them, and so we've had some good set of discussions. Again, that's an ongoing discussion that we've got with the airline industry about the possible use of the test. And let's be fair, you know, that we're not the only 15-minute test in the market now. There's been a few come out as well, and so, you know, the opportunities, I think, are growing. Having said that, the market is massive. You know, the global need for 15-minute tests is so large that we don't believe the current set of suppliers can supply the global market in any way, shape or form. And that market, by the way, is growing every day. So, you know, the market opportunity is very, very large COVID-19 15-minute rapid test. So in answer to your question, yes, we've had several different organisations and industry bodies come to us to talk about the possible use of the test, especially in the Australian market. It's interesting that the government has taken the stance that it has, and especially the TGA, around the use of rapid tests in the Australian market. The Australian market is quite different to the US market, where I think there's an opportunity to use, or they have taken a stance to use rapid tests more liberally, and therefore you see the likes of Huang and others gravitating towards that market. Well, that market is attractive to us as well, obviously, and we certainly will be entering it. But in Australia, there's been a stance to, I guess, limit the use of 15-minute tests in airline type scenarios, or at least have some sort of regulatory control over it. And that's been a discussion that has been ongoing with the TGA and in a public forum, especially around the likes of the Doherty Institute and other organisations like that. Now, we're part of that conversation. We've certainly got a useful contribution to make, and we're very pleased that it's happening. And we think in the fullness of time, there'll be a little bit more opening up of the opportunities in Australia to use COVID-19 tests in the scenarios such as airlines, commensurate with what's happening globally. And again, that will enable us to participate in those types of operations locally and open up a bit more market for us.
This next question, we only have time for a couple more questions, but this one's a little bit more forward thinking. Obviously, I mean, unfortunately, this won't be the last global pandemic. How equipped is the company now to produce commercially ready assays required for future pandemics rapidly?
Okay, yeah, well, obviously, very much more than we were. I'll be honest with you, when we started the program in March of this year, we didn't make any announcements about it originally, because it was specifically a development program that may or may not have worked. So in June, when we made the announcement, or July when we made the first announcement, it was because we had a successful working test, and we were very, very excited about that. That whole 3-month process was a lot of development work to understand how to make a high sensitivity European-based test work for a viral antigen such as COVID-19. And we were basically successful at our first attempt, which not many organisations have achieved. So we're in a great position to do any type of viral assay. Notwithstanding, not all viruses are the same, so we can't claim that we can do any one. We have to do the work to make sure that it does work. But we've got the skill, capability, and the technology to do that, and we've proven it. So we're in a really good position. But generally speaking, the whole program of work has opened up the opportunity to produce assays for medicinal and clinical and diagnostic use generally. So we're not in the future not just focusing on pandemic type scenarios, but we're focusing on producing assays that help the clinical process generally. And that was where we started when we started to look at sepsis, because sepsis, as many people know, is actually more lethal on a volume of death scale than COVID-19. And we think our sepsis test, when brought to market, will make a significant difference to the control of that particular disease. Now, sepsis is not a pandemic, it's not a virus. It's a disease, and it's a different scenario. And we believe that our capability has been successfully demonstrated to not only produce a useful test for a pandemic type scenario, but for a clinical disease type scenario as well.
And just finally, last question, which markets and geographies would ADO target with the COVID test if we secured TGA approval in February next year?
Well, the obvious ones are the US and Europe. The greatest market need is in the US and Europe right now. And those are the markets that are investing quite heavily in to try and control the pandemic, and they have the most need. And so, market forces are market forces, and people will gravitate towards that, and we will as well. you know, we see ourselves playing a vital role, despite the fact that every test producer is going to turn up in that market. The market is huge, so there's going to be, you know, plenty of opportunity for us to differentiate with our sensitivity and find the place where our tests will be most effective to helping them control the disease. So that's where we want to be. The Australian market obviously is very important to us, and as I mentioned, we've been working with government to make sure that we're positioned the right way and the most appropriate way, not only for the current need of the Australian market, but for the need going forward, as this discussion about how these tests can be used in a better way. And so we're part of that process, and we will be focusing on that part of the market world as well. Going forward, unfortunately, the pandemic crisis is not over. It's actually growing, and it's growing in other parts of the world that not every organisation is focusing on, such as South America, in Africa itself. We see ourselves as playing a potential role in these large markets as well. The market need in those countries or those parts of the world will go way beyond the release of a vaccine, and that market we see as having great need and one that we can make a difference to as well.
Yep.
Fantastic. Look, that's all the time we have today. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to all the questions, but I want to sincerely thank you all for joining me. We've had a wonderful turnout with over 200 people on the call, so I really appreciate your time. I'd also like to thank both Derek and Charlie for presenting and taking the time to answer some questions. Derek and Charlie, before I let you go, do you have any last comments or observations?
No, just to thank everybody for their support going forward. It's been a really exciting time for the company, and it's really important that we reach out and connect as much as we possibly can. We hope everybody's enjoyed this forum. We're going to do another one in a few weeks' time for the energy business, which, by the way, is equally as exciting. So we look forward to that, and we hope everybody is well, as I mentioned, and stays safe going forward. So thanks very much.
Thanks.
Beautiful. Again, thank you everyone for joining me today. As I mentioned before, a recording of the webinar will be on AnteoTech's website and social media platforms later today. I trust you enjoyed these insights from Derek and Charlie. I certainly have. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.